Welcome to the Computer Security Seminar from Purdue University. Today's speaker is from Colorado State University. She is Indrakshi Ray, and she will speak on an anonymous fair exchange e-commerce protocol.
Thank you.
Indrakshi.
I'm Indrakshi Ray, and I joined Colorado State University in fall of 2001. So before beginning my talk, I would like to very briefly describe some of the current projects I'm involved with. So my research spans the area of database systems, software engineering, and security. The work that I'm doing in software engineering is basically on designing secure systems. Now, pretty much everybody agrees that you need to address security concerns at every phase of the software development lifecycle. You can't add security as an afterthought to any system. So we are trying to address security concerns at the design phase. Now, design of a software application is not designed as a monolithic unit. It is typically decomposed into modules on the basis of functionality. And security concerns in general are pervasive in nature. By this, I mean that a security concern impacts not only one module, but impacts several of these modules. Now, embedding the security concern inside the application has several disadvantages. For example, if you are to understand the security concern, you must understand the functionality of the module in order to understand the security concern. If you want to change it, you have to make the changes in a number of places because the security concern is spread across multiple modules. So our solution to this problem is to abstract away the security concern into a separate module, which we term the aspect, and then methodically integrate this aspect with the module of the application. And the end result of this integration is that you have an application in which the security concerns have been addressed. Now, isolating the security concern into an aspect has certain advantages. For one, now the security concern is kept separate from the application, so they are separately documented, the security requirements. You can understand it more clearly because now you don't have to understand the application to understand the security concern. And the third is changing is much easier because when the security concern changes, you just make the change in the aspect and you can get the effect. So this, having said that, but before this approach can be used, we need to answer some research questions such as how do we specify security aspects? How do we what are the properties of the security aspects? How do we verify these properties? How do we analyze the security aspects? How do we integrate multiple of these aspects? And how do we how do we resolve conflicts between the different security aspects? So this project that I just mentioned is funded by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, and a related project that we are doing is on the design of trustworthy systems, in which we have, a trustworthy system typically has different dimensions to it. For example, it should be fault tolerant, it should be secure, it should, satisfy certain performance objectives. Now, all these different dimensions impose, different kinds of requirements, and sometimes these requirements conflict with each other. So how do we find such conflicts? How do we do the conflict resolution? And what can we say about the resulting system? The other project that I'm doing is based on survivable transaction processing. And the idea is that however sophisticated prevention techniques you come up with, attacks are a fact of life and they will occur. And this is because attacks can occur not only from outsiders, attacks can be caused by perfectly legitimate, authorized users, disgruntled users. So they may go ahead and corrupt part of your database. And so other transactions reading from these corrupted data items and writing other data items helps spread this damage. So the issue here is how do we assess the damage, how do we repair the damage in a timely fashion. And the problem becomes even more acute when the transactions in the system are not just simple transactions of the classical transaction processing model, but they are more advanced transactions, and which are basically composed of component sub-transactions having complex dependencies between them. So in this case, the dependencies also further help spread the attack. So this project that we are doing is funded by the National Science Foundation. And the third project I'm currently involved in is on modeling trust. Now, in the security world, people assume a very simplistic notion of trust. Either an entity is trusted or it is not trusted at all. But in real world, there is no such absolute trust or distrust. We have different degrees of trust. So I might trust you to some degree on some context. Now, what we are trying to do over here is try to identify what are the factors that affect trust as pertaining to information systems. So what are the factors it depends on? How can we come up with a degree of trust? And how does trust change with time? What happens if we combine information having different degrees of trust? What is the resulting trust value of this information? So these are some of the questions that we are trying to answer. And this project is funded by Air Force Research Labs and Federal Aviation Administration. Having said that, I come now to the main part of my talk, which is an anonymous fair exchange e-commerce protocol. And this was one of our past projects, and it was funded by the National Science Foundation. And this work I did with my colleague Indrakshi at Colorado State University. So the outline of this talk will be organized as follows. Now, we feel that a fair exchange e-commerce protocol must have three very important properties: fair exchange, cross-validation, and anonymity. And in the motivation part, I will try to explain why we think these three properties are necessary for fair exchange protocols. Next, I'll present some background. We use different types of keys in our system, so I will just describe the kinds of keys that we use. Then I'll describe the protocol, and finally conclude the talk. Now, during the talk, please feel free to interrupt me at any point if you need some clarifications. So the first property we think is very important for an e-commerce protocol is fair exchange. And by the word fair exchange, we mean that there are two parties who are trying to exchange each other's items. So the idea is that either the exchange will take place completely or will not take place at all. Now let's see why this property is needed in the context of e-commerce transactions. So we have a customer, and who's that lady, and we have a merchant. And the customer tells the merchant, I want to purchase Mento Madness. The merchant gives all kinds of assurance to the customer, saying that your financial information will be appropriately encrypted. And he also tells the customer that the cost of the product is $25. The customer duly sends an e-check for $25. So the merchant says that he was my 10th victim, bye. So the customer, she goes ahead and complains. And the authorities say, tough luck, we can't trace him. So this situation is not very uncommon in an e-commerce transaction. So unlike the brick and mortar transaction, here the customer and the merchant, either of the two parties, can disappear without a trace. So in this particular example, the customer fair exchange was compromised. So the customer parted with his gifts